Is marriage really worth it? All this and more on The Forged. There's a big movement called the men's rights activist movement, and it tends to base itself on especially the concept of women, just there are no good women left, and the ones that guys end up marrying are probably going to take them to the cleaners, and the institution of marriage has been completely bankrupt by the system, choosing women over men. And I'm not going to argue or deny any of that to a point. I have watched friends get completely decimated by the system. And the cool thing about what I've watched them go through is they haven't walked out of the system with complete bitterness and vitriol against the woman who used the system against them rather well, rather successfully. And I'm not making light of it. Obviously, it's a sad and so frustrating to watch. What I'm watching now is the solution being, therefore men should just completely remove themselves from marriage. I don't think this is a good pathway to take, and here's why. Now, obviously, I'm a Christian, and I want to speak to young Christian men, especially who you're taking in a lot of this information. You're trying to figure out, okay, is it even worth it to seek out a good quality? The internet is a horrible microcosm of the worst of people. It can also be a microcosm of the best, but we see the worst of people. And what we see so often is something that has picked up steam in terms of views. Very rarely are you going to get the very nuanced outtake of something. And so what you see often are these women who are being interviewed out on the street and they say, I need a man with $200,000 and blah, blah, blah. And there are plenty of women out there. The thing is, I was a young adults pastor. I've been involved in youth ministry. When we go out for the ministry that I'm a part of, Self-Evident, we do homeschool conferences and all of that. And so I get to interact with a lot of the upcoming generation. And I have seen a lot of quality young people, both males and females. So I know when I go out there, there is some quality still out there. So do not let the influence of social media, the influence of what's on the internet, what gets popular, and of course, those voices who are telling you, oh, they're all evil, they're all horrible, they're all wicked. Don't let that steer you in a certain direction, because you'll start to see people in real life that way. It's the same thing as this whole microaggression thing that popped up a couple of years ago. Microaggressions are the idea that somebody has a motive in their heart against you, and that's why they did some non-offensive thing that you took as offensive. I use the example, if you open the door for somebody, or rephrase, I'll give you the example. You don't open the door for somebody. The microaggression in the person's heart is, they did it because I'm male, or I'm female, or I'm black, or I'm white. Your head is, oh crap, totally forgot to open the door for that guy. That sucks. See, when we start painting motives onto people, or we go through a bad situation, or we see somebody else go through a bad situation, we paint that generalization onto everything. Now, I have been through the gamut of relationships. So it's not as though I'm speaking from some way off place. I didn't meet the perfect woman at 18 and marry her and now perfectly. I didn't meet her until I was, 26? 27. And before that, I ran the gamut. And I was both in a place where there was an abundance of women and some good ones and some bad ones. And then I was in a place where there were no women. And I held out hope because I knew what the Lord was doing in my life and I knew what I needed at that time. And I went through a desert where I could not possibly get a woman no matter how I try. Now, I say all that to say there is still hope, and don't let bitterness take root. Second, why would we look at the institution of marriage, something God provided to us, and the result of marriage should be creation of life, which is, to me, one of the ultimate spiritual gifts God has given us. Sexuality is very spiritually powerful, and guess what Satan tries to do? Remove creation out of it. So then it just becomes destructive, no ends. When I see people talk about you need to just leave behind the institution of marriage, what that says to me is actually destruction on something that God intended. It's just like government. God intended government. So we don't completely abolish the thing, even though there are tyrants and dictators and communism and all of that. So instead of completely demolishing the institution, maybe we should step back to that real traditional value of upholding it the way it should be upheld and respecting it the way it should be, which means maybe we shouldn't run off and get married after 4 months of dating when we're 18. And we should refrain and hold higher standards. Now, I'm not saying that's the case in every case, but that's a case in many cases where people get married too young, or they fall in love, which is really just lust. They jump in too quick, and then it all goes haywire because you didn't actually know the girl you were marrying. I believe that it's something where we as this generation need to be training up the next generation, both men and women, the value of marriage and the importance of it and the use of it. And that it is a redeemable system because guess what? If you're going to be a Christian man and you want to enjoy the blessing of future generations, of creating the next generation, well, you have to get married. Now, there are some men who they're called to be single in their life, and they're okay with that. Even Scripture says most aren't called for that. And this idea of marriage, this institution of marriage, be wary of the voices that are telling you to tear down the institution because guess what? They had a bad rap of it. Be wary of the advice you get from people who are emotionally wounded from a situation. It's not that they can't have sound wisdom, but the sound wisdom comes from those who have actually overcome it. And there are plenty of people who are giving advice out of their emotional wounded nature that do not provide good advice because guess what? There's still plenty of bitterness. And I've watched several of these supposed expert voices, and when you really get down to the brass tacks of it, they're very wounded people. And it's very easy to set up a camera and talk to the camera and give your advice to the camera. And we need to be aware of what is the life that person is leading. What's the fruit of their life? And that's why we're told a good tree cannot produce bad fruit and a bad tree cannot produce good fruit. So if that tree is telling you, down with the institution of marriage, all women are evil, none of this is useful, get rid of it all I ask is look into what type of tree are you eating the fruit of. And you may do well to separate away from that. And take the cross gamut, but go back to Scripture and use Scripture as your guiding ethos. And you'll avoid a lot of that emotional woundedness, that bitterness, that anger, that hatred, that vitriol that can wrap itself so perfectly up in words of intelligence and wisdom and care. So here's my advice. Take it for what you will. If you want it, you want it. You don't, you don't. Be wary of the lens you look through when you're looking at other people. Because there are almost 8 billion people on this earth. It stands to reason that perhaps not all of them are completely useless. And some may be of value. All right, guys. We'll talk to you soon.